A shock decision from Turkey's central bank is pushing the country closer to a currency crisis. Interest rates were widely expected to go up to protect against rising inflation, seriously rising inflation, and a weak lira. However, interest rates by the central bank remained unchanged. And that's raised speculation that President Erdogan may be influencing monetary policy. After all, he once called interest rates the mother and father of all evil. Look and see what happened, and you'll see markets overall were completely stunned by the move. The lira, the Turkish lira, you don't often see that. Well, in currencies you do. So, I mean, the numbers may not be great, 280, 202, but that's a really sharp, dramatic fall. It does sort of perk back up again and hold its own. But it was down by as much as 4%. And Turkey's benchmark interest rate stands at 17.75%. Many expected it to hit 18.75. So bearing in mind the relationship between the interest rate and inflation, and you start to get an idea of how bad the problem is. The inflation at the moment, with a benchmark at 17, inflation is at an eye-watering 15.4%, 3 times the official target. James Jeffrey is a former US ambassador to Turkey. He joins me from Aspen. I think I've stated the underlying economics relatively fairly there. Would you agree?
You hit all the numbers right on the head, Richard, and it's good to be back on your show.
And it's good to have you, sir. So how bad is the economic situation? Should the central bank have raised rates as an anti-inflationary measure? And related to that, do you believe the failure to do so was because of political presidential pressure?
Let me start with the first question. Yes, they should have. We saw this, you'll remember, far more dramatically about 2 months ago when they didn't raise rates. The lira really sank, and then they had to raise it by 300 basis points, 3%. And they stabilized it, of course, just before the elections. Well, elections are over. President Erdogan's party and Erdogan personally have won or secured what we would consider victories. And it could be that he's exercising some kind of moral suasion on the central bank. But technically, it is still independent, even though his powers have grown, and he has replaced the economic czar, former Deputy Prime Minister Şimşek, with his son-in-law, who was the energy minister, Mr. Al-Bayrak, now as finance minister. But again, Al-Bayrak has talked about the need for keeping interest rates high as well and keeping the central bank independent. So we can't really determine yet what the political reasons are.
I mean, getting rid of inflation is difficult, but we know how to do it. Volcker showed us that 30-odd years ago. You raise rates and you squeeze it out the system. But Turkey cannot live with an inflation rate of 14 or 15% in a low inflation environment in the rest of the world.
That is true, but in my experience going back to the early 1980s serving in Turkey, it has made a virtue out of high inflation, yet the economy keeps on growing, and depending on whether you look at the nominal or the purchasing power parity rate, it's either 17th or the 13th largest economy in the world, with almost 7.4% growth last year. It's overheating, but again, Turkey has managed to ride out these crises before.
That suggests that you don't expect action, and you do expect it will ride it out this time again.
Part of riding it out, Richard, is sooner or later they realize they have to raise interest rates, which they did with a vengeance, again, 2 months ago. So in the end, you're right. The laws of monetary supply and demand are no different than oil or anything else. They've got to make interest rates go up to get the lira back in better shape with the dollar and euro.
Of course, the high inflation does inflate away a lot of debt in the process. That's not exactly a recipe for success in many cases, but it can be a useful policy in cases where there is an overburden of debt in the market.
You're a better economist than me, but generally I think that's risky thinking. Also, in terms of public debt, Turkey's in pretty good shape. Turkey also has a very large current account deficit, which inflation tends to exacerbate. and it is very dependent upon foreign investment, which has been fleeing the country, and that's the problem. That's the rub.
Good to see you, Ambassador. Thank you. I appreciate it very much.